Before I begin, let me just say that sometimes life throws you a curveball so sharp, so unexpected, it knocks the breath right out of you. And sometimes, the person throwing that ball is the one you least expect, the one you poured your heart and soul into. My son, David, said something about me, something he thought I wouldn't hear. He said, "Mom's just dead weight, dead weight. After everything." Well, I wasn't about to just wither away under the weight of that cruelty. Oh no. This is the story of how I showed him, and his equally charming wife Sarah, what dead weight really means, and how I reclaimed not just my dignity, but my life. Stick around, because you might just learn a thing or two about inner strength, and the quiet satisfaction of well-deserved vindication. The words echoed in the small hallway where I'd paused, my hand halfway to the doorknob of my own bedroom, a room that was increasingly feeling like a borrowed space in my son's house. Mom's just dead weight now. We need to figure something out, maybe a home. She's got her pension, but it's not like she's contributing much else. David's voice, usually so warm when he wanted something, was flat, clinical, as if he were discussing a piece of outdated furniture he was eager to dispose of. Sarah's murmured agreement, a soft, insidious poison, followed. My blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. Dead weight. Me, Eleanor, his mother. The woman who had skipped meals so he could have new shoes for school, who had worked overtime for years to help him with the down payment on this very house, the house where I was now apparently just an inconvenient fixture. My late husband, Tom, always said I had a heart too big for my own good, especially when it came to David, our only child. We'd poured everything into him, our time, our love, our savings. When Tom passed 5 years ago, it felt natural, albeit heartbreaking, to sell our little home, the one filled with decades of memories, and move in with David and Sarah. David had insisted. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," he'd said, his eyes full of what I'd mistaken for genuine concern. "We have plenty of room." The proceeds from my house sale, a considerable sum, had mostly gone into renovations for their house, the new kitchen, a sunroom they'd always wanted. I'd told myself it was an investment in my comfort too, a way to contribute. But in the quiet, lonely nights, a small, nagging voice had begun to whisper that perhaps my contribution was seen more in monetary terms than in familial ones. The air in the house had grown subtly cooler towards me over the past year. Little things, at first. My opinions on dinner choices or television programs, once sought, were now politely ignored. My offers to help with chores were often met with a strained, "No, Mom, we've got it," as if my touch would somehow contaminate their perfect, modern life. Sarah, especially, had a way of looking at me, a quick, appraising glance that made me feel like an ancient relic cluttering her minimalist decor. I remembered the sacrifices with a clarity that was now excruciating. The dreams Tom and I had put on hold for David's sake, the trip to Italy, the little cottage by the sea we'd talked about for our retirement. All of it redirected towards David's education, his first car, his wedding. Not once had I regretted it, not until this moment. Dead weight. The phrase was a physical blow, leaving me breathless, clutching the wall for support. The warmth of family, the security I thought I had, all of it dissolved into a bitter illusion. I wasn't a beloved mother, a cherished grandmother-to-be, a dream they never seemed keen to fulfill. I was a line item on their budget, a problem to be managed, a weight to be shed. The doorknob felt cold beneath my trembling fingers. I couldn't face them, not yet. I turned and retreated to the small guest bathroom, locking the door, my reflection a pale, shocked stranger in the mirror. The woman staring back had tears welling in her eyes, but beneath the shock, a different kind of fire was beginning to smolder. It wasn't just hurt, it was a profound, aching betrayal. The immediate aftermath of those overheard words was a blur of fractured thoughts, and a pain so deep it felt like a physical wound in my chest. I sat on the edge of the bathtub in that cold, impersonal guest bathroom, the one I'd been allocated, replaying David's voice, Sarah's complicit murmur. Each syllable was a fresh stab. Dead weight, how could he? My David, the little boy whose scraped knees I'd kissed better, whose nightmares I'd soothed, whose every triumph had been my own. The boy who, when he was just 7, had written me a Mother's Day card promising to buy me a castle when he grew up. Now, apparently, a nursing home was the best he could offer. I thought back, sifting through memories, searching for clues I must have missed. Were there earlier signs? Subtleties that my loving, perhaps willfully blind, eyes had overlooked. Yes, now they came flooding back, each one a small cut, invisible at the time, but now part of a larger, bleeding wound. The way Sarah would sigh dramatically if I took too long to finish a story at the dinner table. The increasing frequency with which David would forget to include me in weekend plans, leaving me to wander the silent house while they went out with friends. The conversations that would abruptly stop when I entered a room. I'd dismissed them as thoughtlessness, the preoccupations of a busy young couple. Now, they seemed like calculated steps in a campaign to marginalize me, to make me feel so insignificant that their eventual solution, a nursing home, would seem like a kindness. The realization was a slow, creeping coldness that settled deep in my bones. They didn't love me. Not really. They tolerated me. And now, even that tolerance was wearing thin. I was an inconvenience, a financial drain they were eager to offload. My pension, which I'd naively assumed was just a little something for my personal expenses, was probably already mentally earmarked by them for the cheapest, most depressing facility they could find. I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours, the tiled floor chilling my feet. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the shock, the tears, the sudden, crushing weight of their disdain. When I finally emerged, I felt different. Older, certainly, but also strangely detached. The warm, fuzzy filter through which I'd viewed my son and his wife had shattered, leaving behind a stark, unforgiving clarity. That evening, at dinner, I watched them. Really watched them. David, avoiding my gaze, engrossed in his phone. Sarah, forcing a brittle smile, asking about my day with a superficial brightness that now grated on my nerves. I saw the impatience in the tapping of her fingers as I slowly ate my food, the slight tightening of David's jaw when I asked him to pass the salt. Every gesture, every inflection, was now loaded with a new, sinister meaning. They were actors, playing their roles, and I had been a fool to believe the performance. The food tasted like ash in my mouth. I excused myself early, feigning a headache, a common enough occurrence for an old woman that it wouldn't arouse suspicion. Back in my room, the dead-weight room, I didn't cry. Instead, a cold fury began to build, a silent, resolute anger that was entirely new to me. I had always been a peacemaker, a compromiser, the one who smoothed over family squabbles. Not anymore. They had underestimated me. They saw a frail, aging woman, easily manipulated, easily discarded. They didn't see the steel in my spine, forged by years of quiet resilience, of making do, of putting others first. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, the words dead weight a relentless mantra, and I began to think. Not about their cruelty, not anymore. But about what I was going to do about it. The turning point wasn't a sudden, dramatic explosion. It was more like a slow, deliberate tightening of a coil within me, a gathering of forces that had lain dormant for too long. For a few weeks after that devastating eavesdropping session, I observed. I listened. I played the part they expected, the slightly forgetful, increasingly dependent mother, a little slower on the uptake, a little more prone to sentimental ramblings. It was a galling charade, but it served its purpose. It lulled them further into their misconception of me as a spent force, someone whose opinions and desires were negligible. The last straw, if I had to pinpoint one, came during a particularly dreary Sunday afternoon. David and Sarah were in the living room, ostensibly watching a nature documentary, but their conversation, conducted in hushed tones they clearly thought I couldn't hear from my armchair, was anything but natural. They were discussing options for me, their voices a blend of feigned concern and practical calculation. Sarah mentioned a facility called Golden Valley Senior Living, her tone suggesting she'd already researched it thoroughly. "It's got good reviews, David," she said, "and it's not too far. We could visit on weekends." Sometimes, David grunted. "What about her finances, though? We need to see what her pension can cover, and if there's anything else, you know, to help with the costs." His voice dropped even lower, conspiratorial. "That nest egg she mentioned from Dad, the one she's so secretive about. We need to gently find out the details." My blood boiled. My secretive nest egg was the modest sum Tom and I had painstakingly saved, a safety net he'd insisted I keep separate after seeing how other widowed friends had been treated by their children. He'd been prescient, my Tom. The sheer audacity of them, planning to pry into my private finances, to allocate my carefully guarded security for their convenience, was breathtaking. Sarah then added the comment that truly cemented my resolve. "Well, the sooner we sort this, the better. It's getting restrictive. We can't really live our lives fully with her here, always needing something restrictive." That's what I was to them. Not a mother, not family, but a restriction on their lifestyle. That was it. The coil inside me snapped. Not with a bang, but with a cold, decisive click. The hurt, which had been a constant, dull ache, transformed into something sharper, more focused, a steely determination. I would not be sorted, I would not be a restriction, and they would certainly not be getting their greedy hands on Tom's legacy or my pension to fund my disposal. That evening, I feigned a mild stomach upset and retired to my room early. But instead of going to bed, I sat at the small desk by the window, the one they'd grudgingly allowed me, and I began to make a list. It wasn't a list of grievances, I knew those by heart. It was a list of assets, of possibilities, of actions. My mind, which they clearly thought was addled by age, felt sharper and more lucid than it had in years. The fog of grief and misplaced loyalty had lifted, replaced by a chilling clarity. I realized they were banking on my passivity, my love for David, my presumed ignorance of financial and legal matters. They were in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just going to protect myself, I was going to reclaim what was mine, including my dignity. The image of myself in some sterile, Golden Valley room, waiting for their perfunctory weekend visits, fueled my resolve. No. That would not be my future. My future would be of my own making. The dead weight was about to show them just how heavy she could be when provoked. A small, grim smile touched my lips. The game was on, and I was no longer a passive observer. I was a player, and I intended to win. My first move was to reach out to someone I knew I could trust implicitly, my oldest friend, Margaret. Margaret and I had been through thick and thin since primary school. She was a retired accountant, sharp as a tack, with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart of gold, though she kept it well guarded. I called her the next morning, when David and Sarah were safely at work. My voice trembled a little as I recounted the dead weight comment and their subsequent plotting. Margaret listened in silence, her occasional murmur the only interruption. When I finished, there was a brief pause, then she said, her voice laced with a familiar, comforting indignation, "Eleanor, those ungrateful little vipers. After everything you've done. Right, first things first, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a shark. A polite shark, but a shark nonetheless. I'd been thinking along the same lines. My knowledge of legal matters was rudimentary, mostly gleaned from television dramas, but I knew I needed professional guidance. Do you know anyone? I asked, feeling a flicker of hope. As a matter of fact, I do, Margaret replied. My niece, Monica, works for a very reputable firm downtown. She specializes in estate planning and elder law, but more importantly, she's tough, and she doesn't suffer fools gladly. I'll give her a call, tell her you'll be in touch. Mention my name. The relief was immense. Having a concrete step to take, a name, an ally, made all the difference. Margaret also gave me some initial, practical advice. Gather all my financial documents, make copies, and keep them somewhere safe, away from prying eyes. And Eleanor, she added, her voice softening, don't let them see anything is different. Play the game. You're stronger than they think. Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. That afternoon, I began my quiet reconnaissance. While David and Sarah were out, I went through my boxes, the ones stored in the attic, ostensibly full of old keepsakes. Tucked away amongst faded photographs and Tom's old service medals was a folder containing statements for an investment account I'd opened years ago with a small inheritance from my aunt. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than David and Sarah suspected I had. Tom had always encouraged me to keep it separate, for a rainy day, Ellie, or for a bit of sunshine when you need it. The rain was certainly pouring now. I also found the original documents pertaining to the sale of my old house and my contribution to the down payment and renovations of David's current home. I had kept meticulous records, a habit instilled by my practical, organized mother. I remembered the discussions clearly. David had been short on the down payment for this larger house he'd coveted. I'd offered to help, significantly. My name wasn't on the mortgage, as my income then was just my small pension, but there was a formal agreement, a promissory note signed by David, acknowledging my contribution as a loan, convertible to an equity share if I ever chose to live there permanently. He'd probably conveniently forgotten about that little piece of paper, assuming his dear old mother would never dream of calling it in. I carefully photocopied everything at a local library: the bank statements, the investment portfolio, the promissory note, my will, which, I noted with a grimace, currently listed David as the primary beneficiary. I rented a small safe deposit box at a bank different from the one I usually used and stored the originals and one set of copies there. The other set I kept hidden in a hollowed-out old cookbook in my room. The next step was calling Monica, Margaret's niece. Her voice on the phone was warm but professional. I briefly explained my situation, mentioning Margaret's referral. An appointment was scheduled for the following week. Walking out of the library that day, clutching my folder of copies, I felt a subtle shift. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. I was no longer just reacting, I was acting. I was taking control. Each small step, the call to Margaret, the locating of documents, the booking of the lawyer, was an act of quiet rebellion, a reclaiming of my agency. The dead weight was beginning to gather momentum. The following Tuesday, I told David and Sarah I was meeting an old school friend for lunch and a bit of shopping, a perfectly plausible outing for a woman of my age. Instead, I took a bus downtown to the sleek, modern office building that housed Monica's law firm, Sterling and Associates. The reception area was hushed and expensive-looking, all polished wood and abstract art. For a moment, I felt a wave of intimidation. What was I, Eleanor, a retired librarian's assistant, doing in such a place? But then I remembered David's callous words, Sarah's dismissive sighs, and my resolve hardened. Monica turned out to be a woman in her late 30s, with intelligent eyes, a firm handshake, and an air of quiet competence that immediately put me at ease. She wasn't the overtly aggressive shark Margaret had jokingly described, but I sensed a keen mind and an unwavering focus. Mrs. Peterson, she began, after ushering me into a comfortable office overlooking the city, Margaret speaks very highly of you. Please, tell me everything, and don't leave anything out, and so I did. I recounted the sacrifices, the move, the financial contributions to David's home, the overheard conversation, their subsequent behavior, and my fears for my future. I laid out the copies of my documents on her wide mahogany desk, the statements from my modest pension, the details of Tom's life insurance payout, which I'd mostly invested, the statements for that separate investment account David knew nothing about, and crucially, the promissory note and agreement regarding my substantial contribution to his house. Monica listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, her expression thoughtful. She examined the promissory note with particular interest. This is very helpful, Mrs. Peterson, she said, tapping the document. Your son formally acknowledged your financial input into the property. This isn't just a gift, it's a documented contribution that, depending on the exact wording and intent, could give you significant leverage, a flicker of something akin to hope ignited within me. Leverage? I asked. What kind of leverage? Potentially, Monica explained, it could mean you have a claim to a portion of the equity in the house, or grounds to demand repayment of the loan. We'll need to review the specifics carefully. The fact that you've been residing there, contributing to its upkeep indirectly by your presence and past financial injections, also strengthens your position beyond just being a guest. She then asked about my will. I confessed, with some embarrassment, that David was the main beneficiary. We should address that immediately, she stated calmly. If your intention is to ensure your assets are distributed according to your current wishes, and to protect yourself, updating your will is a priority. We also need to look at powers of attorney. Do David or Sarah currently hold any for you? I shook my head. No, Tom always handled things, and since he passed, I've managed on my own. They've hinted, though, that I should simplify things by giving David power of attorney, in case something happens. Monica's eyebrows rose slightly. It's fortunate you haven't. We need to ensure you appoint someone you trust implicitly, should you ever need assistance. Perhaps your friend Margaret, or another trusted individual. We spent nearly 2 hours together. Monica was thorough, patient, explaining complex legal terms in plain English. She outlined a strategy. First, secure my liquid assets by moving them to new accounts under my sole control, at a different bank. Second, draft a new will and establish durable powers of attorney for finance and healthcare, appointing Margaret, who I would need to ask, but I was sure she'd agree. Third, and most significantly, determine the best course of action regarding the house. Monica suggested that, given my contribution and the promissory note, I had several options, ranging from formally demanding repayment of the loan to, more drastically, forcing a sale of the property to recoup my investment if they couldn't or wouldn't buy out my share. The thought of forcing the sale of David's home, the home he cherished, gave me a pang of guilt. But then I remembered, dead weight, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. About securing my own future, because my son was clearly unwilling to. As I left Monica's office, armed with a list of tasks and a sense of guarded optimism, I felt lighter. The heavy cloak of victimhood was beginning to lift. I was no longer just Eleanor, the grieving widow, the burdensome mother. I was Eleanor, a woman with rights, with resources, and with a very good lawyer. The plan was taking shape, layer by intricate layer. At home, I continued my charade. I complained a little more about my aches and pains, forgot where I'd put my glasses, asked Sarah to repeat herself all the little things that would reinforce their image of me as a declining, dependent old woman. It was a distasteful role, but a necessary one. Each sigh from Sarah, each impatient glance from David, only fueled my determination. They thought they were cleverly managing me towards an institution. They had no idea I was managing them towards a reckoning. My secret trips to the new bank, the quiet hours spent with Monica refining my new will, the careful shredding of old financial statements, these became my clandestine acts of self-preservation. The dead weight was indeed becoming heavy, but it was the weight of impending consequences for David and Sarah, not for me. The next phase of my plan centered on the house. Monica had confirmed that the promissory note, coupled with evidence of my significant financial contribution to the down payment and subsequent renovations, gave me substantial leverage. David and Sarah lived in that house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in a desirable neighborhood, as if it were entirely their own kingdom. They'd upgraded the kitchen with gleaming granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, installed a spa-like bathroom, and landscaped the garden to perfection, all significantly funded by the proceeds from the sale of my home, the one Tom and I had lovingly built our lives in. They'd conveniently forgotten, or chosen to ignore, that a substantial portion of its foundation was built on my generosity, a generosity they now scorned. Monica and I discussed options. I could simply demand repayment of the loan as stipulated in the note, but that felt insufficient. It wouldn't address the emotional wound, nor would it truly make them understand the gravity of their betrayal. The idea of forcing a sale, or demanding they buy out my equity at current market value, was far more potent. It would strike them where they were most vulnerable, their lifestyle, their image, their comfort. It felt audacious, even to me, but the more I considered it, the more fitting it seemed. They wanted to discard me. Fine. I would detach myself from them, and that included detaching my financial stake in their comfortable lives. While Monica worked on the legal strategy, my task was to continue playing the role of the fading matriarch. This was, in some ways, the hardest part. Every forced smile, every feigned moment of confusion, felt like a betrayal of my own intelligence. But I reminded myself of the stakes. I needed them to remain complacent, to continue underestimating me. I even amplified my act slightly. I started misplacing things more often, asking them to explain simple modern gadgets like the new television remote, sighing about how complicated the world had become. Sarah, in particular, lapped it up, exchanging knowing, pitying glances with David. "Poor Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "she's really not coping well on her own, is she?" Little did she know, I was coping magnificently. During this period, I also began discreetly looking for a new place to live. I wanted a small, manageable apartment, perhaps in a community with other active seniors, but definitely not a home chosen by David and Sarah. I scoured online listings, made a few quiet visits to potential places when I was supposedly out meeting Margaret, or attending a non-existent book club. I found a charming 2-bedroom unit in a well-maintained building not too far from Margaret, with a little balcony perfect for a few pots of herbs. It felt right. It felt like a new beginning. I started to visualize my life there, peaceful, independent, surrounded by my own things, chosen by me. The thought gave me strength. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, alone in my room, the enormity of what I was planning would sometimes overwhelm me. David was still my son. Was I being too harsh? Was there another way? But then I would hear his voice in my memory, flat and cold, "Mom's just dead weight," and the doubt would recede, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. This was not about revenge, I told myself repeatedly. It was about self-preservation, about justice, about ensuring that I would not spend my final years warehoused and forgotten, my resources plundered by those who felt entitled to them. One evening, David approached me with a handful of glossy brochures. "Mom," he said, his tone oozing a practiced solicitude that now made my skin crawl, "Sarah and I have been thinking. We are worried about you being here, especially when we are at work. We found some really lovely places, assisted living communities, where you'd have people around all the time, activities, companionship." He spread the brochures on the coffee table. Golden Valley Senior Living was prominent among them. My heart hammered, but I kept my expression one of mild, slightly confused interest. "Oh," I said, picking one up, pretending to study it. "That's thoughtful of you, dear," Sarah chimed in. "They have lovely gardens, Mom, and little craft groups. You'd make so many new friends." Their words were like sugar-coated poison. They were so sure of themselves, so confident in their assessment of my decline. I almost pitied their ignorance. Almost. This was their opening salvo, the gentle beginning of the final push to get me out. It confirmed I was on the right track, that my timing was crucial. I needed to let them believe they were succeeding, right up until the moment I pulled the rug out from under them. The dead weight was still playing its part, but the gears of my own plan were turning, quietly, inexorably. The weeks that followed were a strange dance of deception and quiet preparation. David and Sarah, emboldened by my apparent passivity and their own self-serving narrative of my decline, became more overt in their discussions about my future. They'd talk at the dinner table, in carefully casual tones, about the benefits of community living for seniors, the relief of having round-the-clock care available, just in case. They'd leave brochures for Golden Valley and similar establishments strategically placed on the kitchen counter or my bedside table. Each instance was like a small hammer blow against my heart, but it also hardened my resolve. I knew I had to let them think they were winning, guiding me gently towards their desired outcome. So, I played along. I'd ask vague questions about the places, feign a little anxiety mixed with reluctant consideration. "Oh, it does look clean," I might say, peering at a picture of a sterile-looking communal dining room. Or, "But would I be able to bring my old armchair?" This, of course, only reinforced their belief that I was slowly coming around, that my resistance was crumbling. Sarah, in a moment of what she probably considered masterly diplomacy, even suggested a visit to Golden Valley. "Just to look, Mom," she'd said, her voice syrupy sweet. "No pressure at all. We can have lunch in their little bistro." "It'll be an outing," I'd nodded slowly, as if mulling it over. "Perhaps, dear. Perhaps that might be a good idea," just to see their triumphant, exchanged glance did not escape me. They thought they had me. They thought the dead weight was ready to be neatly packaged and shipped off. Meanwhile, my own preparations were nearing completion. I had secured the lovely little apartment, paid the deposit, and arranged a move-in date for the end of the month. Monica had finalized all the legal documents, my new will, naming Margaret as executor and leaving a significant portion to a distant, deserving niece and a local animal shelter Tom, and I had always supported, with only a token, almost insulting, amount left to David to remember his mother by, as Monica had dryly put it. The powers of attorney were signed, sealed, and in Margaret's safe keeping. Most importantly, Monica had drafted a formidable legal letter to be sent to David and Sarah regarding the house. It outlined my financial investment, referenced the promissory note, and formally demanded that they either buy out my equity share at current fair market value within 90 days, or the property would be subject to a court-ordered partition sale. The trap, as it were, was meticulously set. I felt a strange mixture of trepidation and grim satisfaction. There was no joy in this, only a heavy sense of necessity. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my son's carefully constructed life. But it was a bomb of his own making, really. He and Sarah had laid the gunpowder with their greed and disrespect. I was merely lighting the fuse. One evening, David sat down beside me on the sofa, an unusually earnest expression on his face. "Mom," he began, "we've booked that visit to Golden Valley for next Saturday. Sarah's taking the morning off. We really think you'll like it." I looked at him, my son, his face a mask of false concern, and a wave of profound sadness washed over me. This was it. The endgame, from their perspective. "All right, David," I said, my voice quiet. "If you think it's for the best," he visibly relaxed, a small smile playing on his lips. "I do, Mom. I really do. This will be so much better for you. For all of us, for all of us." The words hung in the air. He meant, of course, better for them. The dead weight would finally be lifted. Little did he know, the real weight was about to descend squarely upon his own shoulders. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, familiar sounds that suddenly felt alien, like the backdrop to a play whose final, dramatic act was about to begin. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't anticipated, the calm that comes when a difficult decision has been made and the path forward, however painful, is clear. The chosen Saturday arrived, draped in a deceptively cheerful autumn sunshine. David and Sarah were bustling about with an almost festive air, a stark contrast to the quiet dread that had settled in my stomach, now mixed with a steely resolve. They spoke of Golden Valley in glowing terms, painting a picture of blissful retirement I knew was a carefully constructed fantasy designed to ease their consciences, if they even possessed such things. I allowed them to fuss over me, to help me with my coat, their solicitude feeling like the ministrations of executioners preparing a condemned prisoner for their final walk. But this prisoner was not going quietly. Just as David reached for the car keys, ready to chauffeur me to my supposed new life, I held up a hand. "Actually, David, Sarah," I said, my voice surprisingly firm and clear, "before we go anywhere, I think we need to talk. Properly." Here they exchanged a quick, puzzled glance. This wasn't part of their script. "Talk, Mom?" David asked, a hint of impatience creeping into his tone. "Can't it wait? We have the appointment at Golden Valley at 11". "No, David," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "It can't wait. Please, sit down." I gestured towards the sofa in the living room, the very room where they had plotted my disposal. Reluctantly, they complied, perching on the edge of the cushions, their knees palpable. I remained standing, a position that felt strangely empowering. I took a deep breath. "Some weeks ago," I began, my voice low but carrying in the sudden silence of the room, "I was in the hallway, and I overheard a conversation. David, you said I was dead weight." The color drained from David's face. Sarah's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth in a theatrical gesture of shock that didn't fool me for a second. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," David stammered, avoiding my gaze. "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice unwavering. "And Sarah, I heard your agreement. I heard you discussing nursing homes, my finances, how restrictive my presence here has become." Sarah started to bluster. "Eleanor, that's not fair. We were just concerned, worried about you." "Concerned?" I cut her off, a sharpness in my tone that surprised even myself. "Concerned that I was a burden. Concerned that my pension wouldn't quite cover the cost of stashing me away. Concerned that Tom's little nest egg, which you were so keen to gently find out the details about, might not be enough to supplement your plans." David looked utterly aghast. "You heard all of that?" "Every word," I confirmed, the cold fury I'd suppressed for weeks now finding its voice. "And it forced me to do a lot of thinking. About my life, my future, and my assets. Assets you both seem to feel quite entitled to. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The air in the room was thick with unspoken accusations and dawning horror on their part. So, I continued, I've made some arrangements. Firstly, my finances are now entirely secured, in accounts you know nothing about and cannot access. My will has been updated, as have my powers of attorney. You, David, are no longer my primary beneficiary, nor do you hold any authority over my affairs. David opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless. Sarah just stared, her face a mask of disbelief. Secondly, I pressed on, I won't be going to Golden Valley, or any other home of your choosing. I've already found my own apartment. A lovely place. I move in at the end of next week, an apartment. David finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. But, Mom, you can't live alone. You're not. Not what, David? I challenged him. Not capable. Not competent. Is that what you think? You seem to have mistaken my grief and my age for senility. That was your mistake, and then, the main event. And thirdly, I said, my voice dropping slightly, imbued with all the gravity I could muster, regarding this house. This house that I helped you buy, that I poured a significant portion of my life savings into. Since I am, as you so eloquently put it, dead weight, I've decided to divest myself of this particular weight. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a crisp envelope. This is a letter from my lawyer, Monica Sterling of Sterling and Associates. It was also sent to you by registered mail yesterday, so you should receive your copy on Monday. It formally outlines my financial stake in this property, backed by the promissory note you signed, David. It states that you have 90 days to buy out my share at current market value. If you are unable or unwilling to do so, I will be petitioning the court to force a sale of the property so I can recoup my investment. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Sarah's sharp intake of breath, like a drowning woman gasping for air. The dead weight had just dropped anchor, and it was about to pull their gilded ship under. David's face, which had been pale, now turned a mottled, unhealthy red. Sarah looked as if she'd seen a ghost, her carefully applied makeup suddenly stark against her ashen complexion. You can't be serious, Mom, David finally choked out, his voice a mixture of disbelief and dawning panic. This is our home. You can't just force us to sell it. Can't I, David? I replied, my voice calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil clearly erupting within him. According to my lawyer, Monica, I most certainly can. You see, when I contributed that rather large sum for the down payment and those extensive renovations, it wasn't merely a gift, though I allowed you to believe it was. It was an investment, documented by a promissory note you signed. A note you seem to have conveniently forgotten. You called me dead weight, David. Well, this dead weight has significant financial ties to this property, and I am now choosing to liquidate my assets. Sarah found her voice, shrill and accusatory. This is outrageous, Eleanor. After all we've done for you, taking you in. Taking me in? I interrupted, my composure unwavering. Or taking my money to fund your lifestyle, and then deciding I was an inconvenience once the bulk of my contribution was spent. Let's be honest, Sarah. My presence here became a burden to you both the moment you thought there was nothing more to gain from me, except perhaps the remainder of my pension to pay for my upkeep in some institution. David stood up, pacing the length of the expensive Persian rug I'd helped pay for. Mom, this is insane. We're family. You can't do this to your own son. Where would we go? We have a mortgage, commitments. You'll have to figure that out, David, I stated coolly. Just as I had to figure out my own future, when I realized my own son considered me disposable. "You're young, you both have good jobs. You'll manage. It's called carrying your own weight." A concept you seem to appreciate, when applied to others. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure rapidly disintegrating. "But, why? Why are you doing this? Is this about revenge?" "Revenge is an ugly word, David," I said, though a small, cold part of me acknowledged a certain grim satisfaction. "Let's call it a reallocation of resources." "My resources?" "To ensure my own comfort and security in my remaining years, since it's abundantly clear I cannot rely on you for that. You and Sarah were so eager to plan my future in Golden Valley. Now you have the unexpected opportunity to plan your own." Sarah began to weep, a theatrical, self-pitying display that failed to move me. "You're cruel, Eleanor. So cruel. We were only thinking of what was best for you." "Were you, Sarah?" I asked, my gaze steady. "Or were you thinking of what was best for yourselves? Of reclaiming this house fully, of having your lives unrestricted by my presence?" The fight seemed to drain out of David. He sank back onto the sofa, his shoulders slumped. The bravado, the entitlement, it all vanished, replaced by a look of utter desolation. "My house," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "It was never just your house, David," I reminded him gently but firmly. "It was an investment I made, in good faith, believing in the strength of family bonds. You were the one who devalued that investment by devaluing me." "They tried other tactics, of course," David pleaded, invoking memories of his childhood, of my love for him. Sarah alternated between tearful appeals and veiled accusations of my selfishness. But their words were hollow, bouncing off the shield of my resolve. The woman who had once crumbled at the slightest sign of her son's distress was gone, replaced by someone they didn't recognize, someone forged in the fire of their betrayal. "You have 90 days, I reiterated, picking up my handbag. "Monica's letter outlines all the particulars. I suggest you consult your own lawyer. I'll be moving into my new apartment next Friday. I'll arrange for a moving company to pick up my personal belongings." I walked towards the door, leaving them amidst the wreckage of their shattered expectations. As I reached the hallway, I paused, turning back for a final word. "You know, David," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with a residual sadness, "Tom always told me to look after myself, to have something set aside. I never truly understood why he was so insistent. Now I do. You've taught me a very painful, but valuable, lesson." And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the son who saw me as dead weight, and the life I thought I would have. The autumn air outside felt crisp and clean, a welcome change from the suffocating atmosphere within. The dead weight had been lifted, not from them, but from me. The following Friday, a small moving van pulled up outside David and Sarah's house. I had already packed my essential belongings: clothes, books, cherished photographs, a few pieces of Tom's, and the antique writing desk that had belonged to my grandmother. David and Sarah were conspicuously absent, having left early for work, unable or unwilling to face me. It was, perhaps, for the best. The movers were efficient and respectful, handling my modest possessions with care. As I directed them, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. This house, which had been my home for 5 years, the place where I had poured so much of my remaining capital and hope, now felt alien, a monument to a fractured relationship. There were no tearful goodbyes, no lingering regrets for what was being left behind, only a quiet determination to move forward. Margaret arrived mid-morning, a thermos of tea and a box of her famous shortbread cookies in hand. Her presence was a warm, comforting anchor in the midst of the upheaval. "You doing okay, Ellie?" she asked, her eyes full of concern as she watched me supervise the loading of a box labeled linens. I managed a small smile. Better than okay, Maggie. I feel lighter, and it was true. With each box loaded onto the van, it felt as though another layer of the dead weight they described to me was being shed. My new apartment was small but bright, with large windows overlooking a park. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. As the movers began to arrange my familiar furniture, it started to feel like home almost immediately. Margaret bustled about, helping me unpack kitchen essentials, making us both a cup of tea. "This is lovely, Eleanor," she said, looking around the cozy living room. "Just perfect for you," and it was. That first night, alone in my new home, I sat by the window, sipping tea and watching the city lights twinkle. There was a profound sense of peace, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing for so long. The silence wasn't lonely, it was serene. I was the mistress of my own domain, however small. No more walking on eggshells, no more forced smiles or feigned frailties. I could breathe again. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new rhythm. I explored my neighborhood, discovered a lovely little bakery, joined the local library, and even signed up for a watercolor class, something I'd always wanted to try. Margaret was a frequent visitor, and we revived our old habit of Wednesday afternoon Scrabble games. I reconnected with other old friends, people I'd unintentionally neglected while absorbed in David and Sarah's world. Life became simpler, quieter, but richer in genuine connection. I heard very little directly from David or Sarah. Monica handled all communication regarding the house. Apparently, they had consulted a lawyer, who had confirmed the validity of my claim and the strength of the promissory note. There was some initial bluster, a few attempts to negotiate a lower buyout figure, but Monica stood firm. The 90-day deadline loomed. Through the grapevine, a distant cousin, who still exchanged Christmas cards with Sarah's mother, I heard snippets. David and Sarah were scrambling. They couldn't afford to buy me out, not at the current market valuation, which had, ironically, increased significantly due to the very renovations I had funded. Their lifestyle, built on a foundation of my money and their assumptions, was crumbling. There was talk of them having to sell the house and downsize considerably, perhaps even move to a less desirable neighborhood. I felt a pang, not of triumph, but of a deep, resonant sorrow for the son I had lost, the relationship that had been irrevocably broken. But there was no regret for my actions. I had done what I had to do, for my own survival, for my own dignity. The satisfaction I felt was not a gleeful rubbing of hands, but a quiet, profound sense of justice having been served. I had shown them what dead weight really meant. It was the burden of their own greed and disrespect, a weight they now had to carry themselves. Months turned into a year. My little apartment became a sanctuary, filled with books, paintings from my art class, surprisingly decent, if I did say so myself, and the comforting aroma of herbs growing on my balcony. I had established a pleasant routine, morning walks in the park, afternoons spent reading or painting, evenings often shared with Margaret, or other friends from my class, or the library. I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't known since Tom was alive, perhaps even more so, as this independence was entirely of my own making. The issue of the house eventually resolved itself. Unable to raise the funds to buy out my share, David and Sarah were forced to put the property on the market. It sold relatively quickly, though I heard, again through indirect channels, that they didn't get the premium price they'd hoped for, as the market had cooled slightly. After the legalities were concluded and my substantial share was transferred to my account, securely managed by a financial advisor Monica had recommended, I felt a final sense of closure. That chapter of my life was well and truly over. I occasionally wondered about David and Sarah. I heard they had moved into a much smaller rental townhouse in a less fashionable part of town. Their lavish entertaining and expensive holidays were, presumably, a thing of the past. Whether they had learned any lessons from their experience, I couldn't say. Perhaps they simply saw me as the villain of their story, the ungrateful mother, who had destroyed their comfortable life. It no longer mattered to me. My focus was on my own peace, my own well-being. The dead weight comment, once a source of such profound pain, had become a strange sort of touchstone for me, a reminder of my own resilience. It reminded me that I was not defined by their perception of me, but by my own actions and my own worth. I was far from dead weight. I was vibrant, engaged, and most importantly, free. There was, admittedly, a lingering melancholy. The dream of a close, loving family, of being a cherished mother and grandmother, had died. That was a loss I would always carry. But alongside that sadness was a quiet satisfaction, a deep-seated knowledge that I had faced betrayal with courage and reclaimed my dignity. I had chosen self-respect over a hollow pretense of family unity. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to my small balcony garden, I paused, looking out over the city. A sense of profound peace settled over me. I had navigated the storm, and I had emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself than I had been in years. The dead weight had, in a rather ironic twist, found its wings. My life was my own again, and it was good. I had learned that true wealth isn't measured in property or possessions, but in peace of mind, in genuine connections, and in the quiet strength that comes from knowing you stood up for yourself, even when it was the hardest thing to do. And that, I realized, was the most valuable legacy of all. My story is a testament to the fact that it's never too late to rewrite your own narrative, to reclaim your power, even when those closest to you try to diminish you. The dead weight, it turned out, was the albatross of their own making, and I was finally free of its shadow.